I still remember that morning so vividly. The kind of damp Seattle morning where the rain wasn't heavy enough for an umbrella, but just enough to make your hair stick together. I came in early, holding a steaming cup of black coffee and the foolish belief that today would be ordinary. I should have known something was off the moment I saw the light on in the 14th floor conference room. No one met that early unless something bad was coming, but I still walked in, because I'm the kind of person who clings to politeness even when instinct screams to run. Paige from HR was shuffling papers. She looked up and smiled that uneasy smile that says, I don't want to be here either, but my boss made me. Across the table sat Victor Hale, the new chief financial officer, every inch of him radiating the confidence of a man who knows how to make others feel small within the first 10 seconds. Clara, have a seat, he said without looking up. His tone carried that perfect mix of practiced authority and quiet boredom that tells you you're just another item on a checklist. I sat down. The coffee in my hand was still warm, but my chest had already gone cold. Paige slid a stack of papers toward me. White sheets, black text, but the number in the middle hit like a punch. My new salary, 60% lower than my current one. 60% lower. I stared at it, waiting for someone to laugh, to say it was a mistake or a cruel joke. No one did. Victor cleared his throat, his voice steady, like he was giving a quarterly report. We're restructuring to align with market realities. Your position remains the same, but the compensation package has been adjusted to reflect a more sustainable model. I looked at him, then at Paige. She looked like she might cry for me. I asked slowly, what if I don't agree? Victor smiled, the kind of smile people wear when they think they hold every card. Then you're free to consider other options, he said. We understand. A strange silence filled the room. I could hear the rain tapping against the window, the hum of the air conditioner, even the faint clatter of a pen falling off the table. Tiny sounds, but they struck like thunder. I set the paper down and smiled. I'll need 24 hours to review this. My voice was calm, and even I was surprised by that. Paige nodded rapidly, grateful for any reason to breathe again. Victor just said, fine, and turned back to his laptop. I walked out through the rows of desks. Everyone kept working, unaware that my salary and half my dignity had just been slashed. I pressed the elevator button and caught my reflection in the brushed steel wall. I looked composed, but inside, everything was collapsing. In the parking garage, I got into my car and exhaled, long and shaky. It felt like being slapped, not once, but over and over, softly, relentlessly, the kind of humiliation no tears can wash away. I rested my forehead on the steering wheel, listening to the rain hit the roof, each drop counting down to something I couldn't yet name. Then I laughed, a dry, hollow laugh. There was something absurd about it all. 10 years I'd given them. I'd rescued failing projects, saved impossible clients, and now they were telling me I was worth 60% less. Market value, he said. That's how people talk when they've never had to worry about paying rent. I unlocked my phone. The screen lit up. A photo of me and Maya at the beach, her hair wild in the wind, both of us laughing like the world was safe. She deserves better than this, I murmured. For a long while, I sat there, listening to the rain. No music, no dramatic lighting. Just silence, thick enough to taste. Then I whispered, almost to myself, or maybe to whoever might be listening, I'm not signing that paper. I started the engine and pulled out of the garage. Outside, Seattle shimmered in shades of silver and gray, traffic lights bleeding color across wet pavement. I didn't know where I was going, home, a cafe, anywhere but there. But I knew one thing for sure. They'd just started a game they thought they would win. And even without a plan yet, I'd already decided it wouldn't end the way they wanted. As I drove into the rain, hands still damp from the weather, I thought, somewhere out there, someone else must have sat in a car just like this, disrespected, undervalued, forced to choose between pride and a paycheck. If you've ever been there, you know the silence in my chest wasn't just sadness. It was the sting of being told you're worth less than you are. And if you're listening to this right now, tell me where you are. Maybe you're in your car, maybe at your desk, maybe lying awake after a long, terrible day. Leave a comment, just so I know I'm not the only one who's been here. Because trust me, This story is far from over. If you like stories about people who rise smart after being pushed to the edge, hit subscribe. The call I'm about to make will make everything you just heard sound like the prologue. I didn't go home that night. I drove around the city for almost an hour with no real destination. The rain kept falling, tapping against the windshield in a dull rhythm that matched the heartbeat of someone too tired to feel. I just knew I wasn't ready to walk into that apartment where Maya, my daughter, was waiting for me to come home for dinner. Seattle looked strange through the glass, as if I hadn't lived here for 10 years. Every shop, every corner, every familiar sign suddenly felt different, like they all knew what had just happened and were silently pitying me. I stopped at a small cafe near Lake Union. The smell of coffee mixed with the damp scent of my raincoat, and for a second, it made me want to cry. I sat there, staring out the window, trying to make sense of everything. When did I become the kind of person people could push into a corner without effort? Maybe it was when I started believing that loyalty meant safety. A naive thought, and an expensive one. When I finally got home, it was almost 8 in the evening. The lights were still on. Maya was sitting on the couch, coloring in an old sketchbook. Every time she looked up and smiled, the whole world seemed to soften. "Did you have dinner already?" I asked, trying to steady my voice. "Yeah. Want me to heat yours?" "No need, sweetheart. I'm just a little tired." Maya tilted her head, studying my face. "My teacher says if you're sad, you should take a deep breath and count to 10. Have you tried that?" I laughed. "I'm already at 11. She nodded wisely, then went back to her drawing. I watched her messy little curls, the way she hummed to herself as she filled the page with color, and for a moment, I forgot the humiliation of that morning. After Maya fell asleep, I sat alone in the living room. The apartment was so quiet I could hear the ticking of the wall clock. I opened my laptop, the pale blue light reflecting on the window glass. Outside, Seattle was still drenched in rain. I pulled up my employment contract, a document I'd never really paid attention to. A single line near the bottom made me stop breathing. No non-compete clause after termination, no restriction, no binding. I read it 3 times. Something inside me shifted. Not much, just a spark flickering through the fog of fear. I thought of Victor and the way he said adjusting to market conditions. The word reasonable echoed in my head, smooth and steady like a stone rolling across marble. The way he said it made me feel less like a person and more like an expense to be trimmed. I closed the laptop, leaned back, and stared at the pale ceiling. 10 years, 10 Christmases, countless nights working until dawn. I remembered the night our system crashed, when everyone panicked, and I stayed to restore the final backup. I remembered the old CEO saying, "Clara, you just saved this company." That sentence once made me proud. Now it only made me laugh. My phone lit up. It was Rachel, my best friend from legal. "Heard something happened this morning. You okay?" "Barely. 60% cut. No negotiation." 5 minutes later, she called. "You're kidding. 60%? Have they lost their minds?" "Just their morals," I said. Rachel sighed. "Clara, don't sign anything. Listen to me. No signature, no email reply, no verbal agreement. They're testing you." "I know," I whispered. "But I have a kid, a mortgage, Maya's meds. They know I can't just walk away." "That's exactly why they're doing it," Rachel said. "But they don't have the right. If you stay calm, I'll help you find a way." We talked for a few more minutes. When we hung up, my heart was beating faster, not from fear, but from something else. A small piece of belief had just returned. I went to my bedroom and stood by the window, watching the rain-slicked city glow under streetlights. Reflections stretched across the pavement like long strands of memory. I whispered, "I won't let them end this story their way." Downtown, in the Horizon office still lit past hours, Victor and Paige were in a private meeting. "Are you sure about Helix?" Paige asked quietly. "If anyone finds out—" "No one will," Victor interrupted. His tone was calm, almost casual, like they were discussing the weather. "Jensen will be gone soon, and once she is, no one will have access to see where the client data is going." Paige looked down, silent. Victor smirked, satisfied. "We just need to keep her quiet for a few more days." Across the city, in my small apartment, I had no idea that Project Helix would be the spark that blew everything open. All I knew that night, between the sound of Seattle's rain and my daughter's soft breathing from the next room, was that I finally opened my laptop again, ready to learn something I should have faced long ago: how to walk away from a place that stopped respecting me without losing the part of myself that still did. I couldn't sleep. All night I tossed and turned, listening to the steady rain outside my window, as if Seattle itself had decided to teach me the true meaning of exhaustion. Maya slept soundly in the next room, her breathing so calm it made me jealous. I wished I could rest like that, without thinking about bills, contracts, and the people in sharp suits who had just reduced my worth to a line on an Excel sheet. By 4 in the morning, I got up, made coffee, and opened my laptop. I started looking for jobs. Or rather, I stared at LinkedIn for 10 minutes before closing it again. 10 years in the same company had turned my resume into a scrapbook, full of memories, but not the kind anyone was looking to hire. I rubbed my temples and told myself I'd think more clearly in the morning. I didn't know that the morning would be nothing like I expected. Around 9, as I was trying to drag myself out of bed to take Maya to school, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me pick up. Clara Jensen? It's Ethan. A deep, familiar voice. It took me a few seconds to place it. Ethan Miles, my former colleague who had left Horizon nearly 2 years ago to join our rival company, Apex Data Systems. Ethan? Wow. It's been a while. 2 years, give or take, since that server crash you saved us from. I still remember how you drank coffee instead of water that night. He laughed softly. Listen, I won't take much of your time, but Cameron Doss, our CEO, he's looking for someone with enterprise client experience. I mentioned your name. I froze, the taste of coffee shifting in my mouth. You did what? Cameron knows about Horizon, about the acquisition, and the recent leadership shakeups. He said he needs someone who understands the market and can rebuild trust with legacy clients. I told him I knew the right person. I let out a small, half-bitter laugh. Ethan, that's kind, but I'm still technically at Horizon, at least until tomorrow. All the more reason to talk today, he said without hesitation. He wants to meet. No pressure, just coffee. 10 a.m. tomorrow, bean and barley, corner of Pike and Fifth. Trust me, you won't regret it. Stop. Before I could respond, his tone dropped slightly. Clara, I know what they did to you. Believe me, Cameron isn't like them. Then he hung up, leaving me there with the phone in my hand and my pulse racing faster than it should. I set my cup down and glanced at the photo of Maya on the fridge. Part of me whispered, don't take the risk. The other part, the one I'd buried for years, said, do it anyway. The next morning, Seattle surprised me with sunlight. I arrived 15 minutes early at Bean and Barley, wearing a white blouse and a gray blazer, the kind of outfit that made me feel like a professional again, not a mother trying to keep everything from falling apart. The cafe smelled of fresh espresso and warm waffles, the hum of the grinder blending with soft jazz. I chose a table by the window and tried not to check the time. The door opened. Ethan walked in, tall, lean, wearing that familiar half smile of quiet confidence. Beside him was a man in his early 50s, silver at the temples, calm, assured. He wore a dark blue shirt, no tie, the kind of man used to being the one others waited for. Clara, this is Cameron Doss, Ethan said. Cameron, this is the woman I told you about, the one who saved Horizon from the 2016 data collapse. Ah, Cameron said, shaking my hand. The woman who cost me 3 contracts because she kept her clients loyal for 3 years straight. Pleasure to finally meet you. I laughed. Sorry about that. Don't be. I like people who know how to make competitors miserable. He gestured to sit. Ethan told me a bit, but I'd rather hear it from you. What's going on at Horizon? I hesitated. They called me in, put a paper on the table, and said they were cutting my salary by 60%. Take it or leave it. Cameron raised his eyebrows. 60%? If I told my accountant to cut 60% of the coffee here, she'd set the office on fire. I laughed for real, the first time in days. I thought about doing some burning myself, but I figured the legal fees would cost more. He smiled, eyes sharp but kind. Horizon's choking itself. I've heard about their internal issues, especially since the buyout. You've been there a long time. What's changed? The value of people, I said without thinking. We used to work for ideas, for purpose. Now everything's just numbers. Cameron nodded slowly. Mind if I'm honest? Please. People like you are exactly what we need. Not because you know systems or clients, but because you understand people. He pulled a paper from his folder. I don't do empty promises. This is a director level role at Apex, strategic operations. Starting salary 165,000, 20% bonus, full coverage for your daughter, and I'll need an answer in 3 days. I held the offer, feeling like it was something too big for my hands. I read it once, then looked up. You don't even know if I'm leaving Horizon. No, he said, eyes glinting. But I know Horizon doesn't deserve you, and soon they'll realize that too. I smiled, small but genuine. Cameron, I'm not sure I'm ready for another fight. He shrugged, maybe not. But from the way you tell your story, I think you're readier than you believe. You just haven't admitted it yet. When I stepped outside, the sunlight hit the raindrops still clinging to the glass, scattering glitter across the pavement. I paused at the corner, looking at the offer in my hand. It wasn't just a job, it was an exit, a reminder that I still had the right to choose better. For myself, and for my daughter. On the drive home, I called Rachel. Rachel, if you're free tonight, bring wine. I've got a story, and maybe a decision to make. What I didn't know was that, at that very moment in Horizon's downtown office, Victor was reviewing HR reports. When his eyes landed on an internal note that read Jensen, meeting external contact, possible competitor, his lips curved slightly. You think you're smarter than me, Clara? He muttered. Let's see who wins this game. As for me, I only knew one thing. I'd just done the smartest thing I'd done in years. The first step away from a place that once made me believe my worth could be cut by 60%. And for the first time in many nights, I felt a little bit of peace. That night, Rachel and I sat in my living room, 2 glasses of wine between us, a scented candle burning quietly. Maya was asleep, and the apartment was wrapped in that rare, safe kind of silence I'd learned to treasure. Rachel was the kind of friend who never had to ask if you were okay. She could tell just by looking. I'm guessing Cameron Doss didn't invite you for coffee just to talk about the weather, Rachel said, half teasing, half probing. I smiled faintly. Not exactly. He wants me at Apex. Double the pay, better insurance, and it actually feels like they want me there, and I'm guessing you're still thinking about it. Of course, if I accept, Victor will lose his mind. He's already looking for a reason to get rid of me. If I refuse, I stay with a 60% pay cut. You see the pattern. It's like choosing between suffocation and slamming your own head into a wall. Rachel took a sip of wine, leaning back in her chair. Clara, sometimes people don't need to choose between good and bad. They just need to choose between surviving and sinking. I said nothing. That line echoed in my head the rest of the night. The next morning, I woke early, dropped Maya off at school, and drove straight to a small cafe downtown, not Bean and Barley, but the Roastery, where Cameron had asked to meet and talk in more detail. I arrived 20 minutes early and took a corner seat. The windows were fogged, and the smell of roasted coffee mixed with caramel hung in the air like a warm blanket. Cameron arrived right on time. He carried himself with that easy authority that doesn't need to prove itself. He shook my hand, polite smile, eyes sharp as glass. Clara, thanks for coming. Hope I'm not ruining your Monday morning. I think you're saving it, I said, and he laughed. We sat down, and after a few pleasantries, Cameron went straight to the point. Ethan told me part of your story. I'd like to hear all of it, not to pry, just because the more I understand, the more I can help. I told him everything, the meeting, the paper, Victor's smooth, corporate tone, as he justified cutting my pay by 60%. When I got to that part, Cameron let out a laugh. Reflecting the market? Horizon thinks they're running a discount store? I laughed too. Then my voice softened. I gave them 10 years. They didn't just take my income. They took my belief that I was worth something, and that's what hurts the most. Cameron nodded slowly, not just sympathetic, but thoughtful, measuring. People like you are the real assets, not the systems, not the tools, people. But companies like Horizon always forget that until it's too late. He pulled a thick envelope from his briefcase and set it on the table. This is a formal offer. I'm not giving it to pressure you. I'm giving it so you know we're serious. I opened it and skimmed through. Director of Strategic Partnerships, base salary 175,000, 20%. Performance bonus, full health coverage for dependents, stock options after 12 months. My throat went dry. Cameron, this is more than I ever made at Horizon, even before the cuts. I know. But your worth isn't the number Horizon decided to print on paper. It's the result of 10 years of trust you built with people. And if you accept, I want you to bring that trust here. I sat in silence for a moment. You know Victor won't let me walk out easily. Cameron smiled slightly. I know Victor. I worked with him briefly. He's the kind of man who loves being on stage but forgets the audience can leave at any time. I laughed. That's pretty accurate. And you know what? Cameron leaned forward. I don't need you to be a spy. I don't want documents or secrets. I just want you to be yourself because when people trust you, they'll come to us. That's all I need. I looked at him, trying to read if this was rehearsed, but it wasn't. He had the tone of someone who'd lost more than he'd gained, and when he said, I respect your ability, it didn't sound like flattery. It sounded like recognition. Give me 3 days, I said. You've got 5, he replied with a smile. But I think you'll call sooner. After the meeting, I didn't go home right away. I walked along Lake Union, where the water mirrored patches of pale gray sky. I sat on a bench, watching the steam rise from the surface, my thoughts tangled like old server cables. Part of me wanted to trust Cameron, to believe in this new chance. But another part, the one scarred by loyalty gone wrong, kept whispering that all companies end up the same. They need you, then they forget you. I called Rachel. He's impressive, I said quietly. I just don't know if I should trust it. You don't have to trust, she said. You just have to decide who deserves another chance at your trust. That night, I sat at my desk, drafting a temporary refusal to Horizon. But my hand froze before hitting send. Instead, I reopened the Apex contract and read it again. Then I folded it neatly and slipped it into my bag. Outside the window, Seattle had started raining again. I listened to the drops against the roof, soft, persistent, like a reminder that every change begins with a single drop. What I didn't know was that in Horizon's office, Victor was staring at a security screen showing employee access logs. The words Clara Jensen, external device connected, flashed at 3:42 p.m., the moment I had plugged in my USB to save the Apex contract. Victor leaned back, a thin smile curling at his lips. Miss Jensen, he murmured, the game is only just beginning. As for me, I heard nothing but the rain, and that faint, unmistakable feeling that this time I wouldn't let them win. The next morning, the Seattle sky was a familiar shade of lead gray. I left home early, dropped Maya off at school, and drove toward the Horizon office. The air inside the car felt cold and heavy, like I was heading to a trial. I knew what was coming. Part of me wanted to stay quiet, take the money, and pretend nothing had happened. But another part, the one that had been crushed for far too long, whispered that it was time. When I stepped into the lobby, everything felt slightly off. People spoke more softly, moved faster, and avoided eye contact. At Horizon, that was always the first sign a storm was coming. Paige from HR stood by the coffee counter. When she saw me, she lowered her gaze. I walked over and asked quietly, anything new? She hesitated, then whispered, Victor's checking data access logs. There's talk about a client information breach. I frowned. A breach? Paige nodded, eyes darting nervously. He says it's serious. And, Clara, he's been asking about you. I felt my heart skip, like someone had pulled a chair out from under me. What did he ask? Whether you copied any files outside the system. I told him no, but he doesn't believe me. I took a slow breath, forcing calm. Of course, Victor was making his move. If I were leaving, he'd need a reason, something big enough to make me the scapegoat. An accusation of a data leak was perfect. serious enough to destroy my reputation, vague enough to need no proof. When I entered his office, Victor was already there. The glass door was half shut, blinds half drawn, the cold morning light cutting across his face like stone. "Clara," he said in a voice too calm to be genuine. "Good, you're here. Sit down." I took a seat, keeping my back straight. "We found client data copied out of the system last night. A USB device connected through your account. Can you explain that?" I met his eyes. "That's my personal drive. I saved contract drafts and performance reports for the internal review." "Oh?" He tilted his head, smiling faintly. "What internal review?" "I think I have the right to back up my own work." Victor chuckled. "You think a lot of things, but you forget that everything you do here, including your work, belongs to Horizon." I could feel the sweat on my palms, but I didn't let it show. "If you think I did something wrong, check the logs. I have nothing to hide." "Oh, we will," he murmured. "And you should think carefully about your future here. I hear Apex is hiring. Seems they're very interested in my people." The last line hit like a stone to the face. I sat still, refusing to let the smirk reach my lips. If they're interested, maybe it's because they know how to value people better than you do. Victor leaned back, eyes glinting with the amusement of a predator watching its prey twitch. "Careful, Clara. I've seen smart people dig their own graves in one brilliant stroke of pride." I stood. "Thanks for the advice. I'll try to avoid that ending." I walked out without looking back. But before the door shut behind me, I heard him mutter, almost to himself, "You're on the list now, Jensen. And when this is over, you'll wish it had just been a pay cut." The rest of the day passed in a haze. No one said a word, but the silence was thick with tension. Rumors spread fast. Victor suspected me of leaking client data to Apex. I noticed the sideways glances, the whispered conversations that stopped when I walked by. By late afternoon, an email popped up from IT. "Your account is under security review. Do not log out or shut down your device." I exhaled, leaning back, just as I thought. Victor was playing dirty, but he'd forgotten something. I wasn't the same Clara who used to sit quietly and take the blame. I grabbed my phone and texted Rachel. "He's setting me up, says I stole data." Her reply came almost instantly. "Don't panic, say nothing, meet me tonight." I closed the laptop and packed my things. When I stood, I looked across the room at my old team, Maria, loyal for 8 years, watching me with worried eyes. I gave her a small nod and a steady smile. In the hallway, I passed Paige on her phone. She hung up the moment she saw me. "Clara," she whispered, "Victor's ordered it to pull your hard drive. He wants a report by morning. I think he's planning something big." I looked at her, silent for a moment, then said, "Paige, thank you. And if anyone asks, tell them I backed up personal files, not company data." She nodded quickly, her voice trembling. "I will. But Clara, be careful." When I left the building, rain had started again. Thin, cold, relentless. I got into my car and sat for a long breath. Victor didn't just want to remove me. He wanted to destroy me. But he'd forgotten one thing. I'd never lost simply because someone wanted me to. I started the engine and looked in the rearview mirror. The Horizon Tower loomed behind me, silver and unfeeling in the rain. The place where I had spent a decade of my life, now nothing more than a battleground. I whispered, almost like a vow. "All right, Victor. If this is your game, then I'll play it to the end." I arrived at Rachel's place close to 8 that night. Her apartment was on the 12th floor, overlooking Lake Washington, a strangely peaceful view, especially in weather like this. She opened the door. Before I even knocked, holding a bottle of red wine, her face tight with concern. "You've been set up," she said flatly. No preamble, no small talk. I just got off the phone with someone in Horizon's legal department. They're preparing an internal report for the board, something about a major data breach involving a certain Ms. Jensen. I took off my rain-soaked coat and tossed it onto a chair. I figured as much. They're pinning this on me to cover something bigger. Rachel poured 2 glasses of wine and slid one toward me. "Project Helix. Ever heard of it?" I froze. "Helix? No. What is it?" "It's Victor's new program. A data mining project is collecting user information illegally." Horizon's out of cash, so he signed a quiet deal with a firm in Singapore to sell customer data. My fingers tightened around the glass, the chill seeping into my skin. My God. Exactly, she said. And accusing you of a breach gives them a reason to audit the system, wipe Helix's real logs, and erase the trail before anyone outside the company finds out. Everything suddenly fit together. I wasn't just collateral, I was camouflage. I leaned back, let out a small laugh. You know, if Victor ever quit finance, he'd make a decent crime director. Rachel sat across from me, serious now. Clara, you can't sit still. If they act first, they'll destroy your name. I can help, but you need to decide quickly. I don't want to sue them, I said. I don't want a drawn out legal circus. I just want the truth out. Then do it the right way, Rachel said. You still have access to the old system, right? If you find proof of Project Helix, I'll send it to the Trade Data Security Commission. Once they open an investigation, Victor won't have time to wipe anything. I was quiet for a long moment. The thought was terrifying and thrilling. And if I get caught, I asked. Then at least you'll fall standing, Rachel said, not kneeling. Later that night, when I left her apartment, I sat in my car for a while. The rain had stopped, leaving thin mist curling above the asphalt. Across the street, the lake reflected the city lights like 1,000 fractured mirrors. I thought of Maya, her future, her safety, and how a woman like me, after 10 years of loyalty and exhaustion, was finally learning to stand up on her own. I picked up my phone and texted Cameron. I need to see you soon. It's important. He called within 5 minutes. Clara, are you okay? I'm not sure, but I think Horizon's hiding something you should know. A pause, then his voice, low and steady. Meet me at the Apex office tomorrow morning at 7. And Clara, don't let anyone know you called me. The next morning, I reached Apex before sunrise. Their office occupied the 21st floor of a new glass tower overlooking Elliott Bay. The air there felt different, clean, alive, free of decay. Cameron was waiting in a small conference room, just him and a cup of coffee. Sit down, he said. Tell me everything. I told him everything about Victor, Project Helix, and the setup. When I finished, he was silent for a moment, tapping his fingers lightly against the table. Do you have proof? Not yet, but I still have access to Horizon's legacy systems, financial and client logs from before the acquisition. If they use those old accounts to move data, I can find the traces. Cameron looked at me, half impressed, half concerned. You're talking about breaching Horizon's system. I'm talking about looking at my own files. Nothing more. I'm not taking anything. He nodded slowly. Clara, sometimes doing what's right means stepping into what's wrong. But please, be careful. I don't want to watch you get crushed by someone like Victor. I smiled faintly, tired but sincere. I'm not afraid of him anymore. I'm only afraid of doing nothing. Cameron stood, walked to the door, then turned back. If you do this, and you find something, don't hold on to it. Send it to me. I have a legal team ready. We'll protect you. Thank you, I said. Don't thank me, he replied softly. Think of it as reclaiming the dignity Horizon took from you. That afternoon, I walked back into Horizon like someone wearing two faces. Employee cooperating with internal review, and woman quietly planning to expose everything. I turned on my computer and logged into the old network. The logs were endless, but I knew where to look. Outbound data packets sent from client servers to unregistered IP addresses. 3 hours later, I found the first string, code marked HX001, time-stamped 3:12 a.m., authenticated by V. Hale. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding. V. Hale, Victor Hale. He had signed off on the very transfer containing the stolen client data. I backed up the file, triple encrypted it, and sent copies to Rachel and Cameron. No subject line, no message, just 3 words. This is Helix. When I hit send, my hands trembled slightly. Maybe from fear, maybe from relief. I knew, in that moment, everything was about to change. Not just for me, but for Horizon itself. I stood by the window, looking down at the city still pulsing with lights and motion. I felt small, but strong in a way I hadn't in years. For the first time, I wasn't being controlled, and I swore, If Victor planned to make me his scapegoat, then he'd live long enough to watch his empire collapse, brought down by the very data he sold his soul to hide. The next morning, the air inside Horizon was so thick it could have been cut with a knife. I walked in trying to look calm, but I knew something fundamental had shifted. The rumor of an internal investigation had spread through the entire company, and my name was right in the middle of it. Paige avoided my eyes when she passed. Maria gave me a nervous look, and Victor, he showed up wearing the calm, predatory confidence of someone who smelled blood. Clara, he called, as I sat down. Good, you're here. We need to talk. The conference room on the 14th floor was freezing. I could hear the faint flutter of the blinds from the air conditioner. Tracy from HR was there too, pale and tight-lipped. She was always present when someone was about to be fired, a professional witness for polite executions. Victor stood by the window, back turned. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, steady, and void of emotion. We reviewed the system logs. The data was copied under your account. Whatever you say, this is a serious violation. You're right, I said, my tone surprisingly calm. It was copied under my account. But you forgot the important part. Who gave that account access to the internal server at 3 in the morning? Victor turned around, a flicker in his eyes. What are you implying? Nothing, I said evenly. Just that if you're going to fabricate a story, at least make it coherent. Maybe you forgot. I was the one who designed Horizon's first security framework. I can tell which logs are real and which are rewritten. Tracy swallowed hard. Clara, maybe we should... Better stay quiet, Tracy. Victor cut her off, eyes locked on me. Miss Jensen, I'd advise you not to turn this into a personal drama. I can request a formal legal inquiry. Of course, I said, shrugging. And I can submit my own report to the Federal Trade Commission. Something about Project Helix, perhaps. The air in the room shifted instantly. Paige went pale. Tracy froze. Victor stood still for a moment, as if someone had poured ice water down his spine. He let out a thin laugh. What are you babbling about, Clara? Not babbling, I said softly, each word clean and sharp. Helix. The data export project is to a third-party firm in Singapore. The transaction was authorized under the name V. Hale. I have the original logs with full authentication trails. Tracy turned to Victor, whispering, Victor, is that true? Nonsense, he barked. She's fabricating this to save herself. There is no Helix. I picked up my phone from the table. Shame, I said, because copies of those logs are already out. One to the Commission, one to Apex Data Systems, and one to my attorney. Just precautions, you know, in case of another data loss incident. Paige gasped. Victor said nothing. The silence that followed was the kind that comes when a person starts measuring the speed of their own downfall. I stood, adjusting my coat. Thank you for reminding me what loyalty is really worth, Victor. Oh, and before you threaten me with legal action, maybe reread your own contract clause. Section 9, subsection B. Any pay reduction exceeding 15% grants the employee the right to terminate employment without notice. I'm simply exercising my right. I turned to leave, but Victor shouted behind me. You think you've won? You have no idea who you're up against. I paused at the door, glancing over my shoulder. Oh, I know. I'm up against a man who forgot that data can be erased, but reputation can't. Goodbye, Victor. The door closed behind me with the sound of his fists slamming against the table. I stepped outside into the wind. For the first time in years, I didn't look back. No regret, no fear, just the quiet release of cutting the rope that had been choking me for far too long. As I drove out of the parking lot, my phone buzzed. An email from Cameron. Got the logs. Sending to legal. You did the right thing. Stay clear. And don't go back to Horizon. I smiled, a small, steady smile. There's a kind of victory that doesn't need applause. It doesn't come with cheers, only with silence. The kind that tells you you've done what was right. That afternoon, the Federal Trade Commission received an anonymous report containing verifiable evidence. Within an hour, Horizon's headquarters was sealed for a temporary audit. Paige called me in a panic. Clara, they're really here. They brought forensic teams. They're asking about Helix. Good, I said. Just tell the truth. Don't hide anything. What about Victor? Her voice trembled. He'll have to answer for what he's done. 3 days later, the news broke. Horizon Analytics under investigation for customer data violations. Chief Financial Officer suspended pending inquiry. I read the headline in silence. Maya sat beside me at breakfast, hair messy, giggling at a cartoon. I set my phone down and brushed her hair aside. "It's over, sweetheart," I said. "The bad job, Mom?" "Yeah, but I found a better one." She grinned. "So you won?" I looked out the window where the rain had finally stopped. "No, honey," I said with a small smile. "I didn't win. I just stopped letting other people lose for me." That afternoon, I met Cameron at Apex. He greeted me with a gentle smile and an expression that felt like genuine respect. "We officially want you to join us, Clara," he said. "Not because of Helix, but because of how you handled everything. Calm, precise, no blood spilled. I just did what I had to do." "That's exactly why you're worth it," he replied. He handed me a new badge, Clara Jensen, Director of Strategic Partnerships. I held it, watching my reflection in the smooth plastic. The same face, but lighter, steadier, with something brighter in the eyes. I turned to Cameron. "You know, Victor once told me I was playing a game I could never win." Cameron smiled. He was wrong. You didn't win his game, you changed the rules. And in that moment, I finally understood. Every storm, every humiliation, every fall had led to this, standing among the ruins of the past and realizing I hadn't just survived. I'd reclaimed everything, and more than that. 2 weeks after I officially started at Apex, my life began to find a new rhythm, a steadier orbit, brighter, quieter, and most of all, peaceful. In the mornings, I took Maya to school. No more rushing, no more weight in my chest. She always held my hand tightly before turning toward the gate, then looked back and smiled, the kind of smile I hadn't seen in years, lost somewhere in the exhaustion of my Horizon days. In the afternoons, I worked in an office filled with sunlight. No more crowded desks, no more sighs hidden under the pretense of teamwork. People at Apex worked with confidence, but also with freedom. No one watched over anyone else. No one feared a misstep. Cameron assigned me 3 major clients. One of the names nearly made me spit out my coffee. Westbridge Technologies. Westbridge, the client I'd managed for 8 years at Horizon. They used to say I understood them better than they understood themselves. I stared at that name on the list for a long moment. I didn't feel triumphant. Not even satisfaction. Just something bittersweet, like seeing someone from your past after both of you had survived different storms. Cameron walked up beside me. "You recognize them, huh?" "I used to manage Westbridge," I said. "They're probably the main reason Victor came after me." "Perfect," he smiled, "because they just sent over an email. They're moving all their contracts to Apex on one condition." "What condition?" He grinned. Their exact words were, "As long as Jensen's on the line." I leaned back in my chair, laughing softly. Not a victorious laugh, just the quiet sound of justice finally exhaling. Later that afternoon, my phone rang. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Ms. Clara Jensen?" "That's me. This is Gerald Haskins, legal counsel for Horizon. I'm calling to inform you that the company is initiating an internal mediation process before issuing an official response to the Trade Commission. They'd like to negotiate." "Negotiate what, exactly?" "The former CFO, Mr. Hale, has been suspended. The new board wants to resolve things privately. They're even considering reinstating your position, if you agree to withdraw your complaint." I let out a quiet laugh, soft but cold. Reinstating me at the same place I just saved from prosecution? I'm not interested in working for people who stayed silent while I was buried alive. "Ms. Jensen," he said, his tone careful, "Horizon is willing to offer financial compensation for emotional distress and—" "I don't want their money, Mr. Haskins," I cut in. "If Horizon truly wants change, they can start by treating the ones still there with decency. People like Maria, like Devin, the ones Victor turned into numbers on a spreadsheet." He went silent for a few seconds, then sighed. "I understand. Still, congratulations, Ms. Jensen. Not many people manage to do what you just did." I hung up, feeling not relief, but a strange, steady quiet inside. That evening, I sat in the kitchen watching Maya do her homework. She scribbled in her notebook, then looked up. Mom, do you hate your old company? I hesitated. No, sweetheart, I don't hate them. I'm just sorry. Sorry for what? Sorry. I stayed too long thinking they'd change. But if you didn't stay, you wouldn't have met the nice people, right? I smiled. Right. And if I didn't leave, I'd never have known how strong I could be. A few days later, the news broke. Victor Hale was officially terminated. Criminal investigation pending. Across the industry network, people whispered about the case, how arrogance met its cost. Paige sent me a short message. I left Horizon. Thank you, Clara. Without you, I'd still be bowing my head, calling it professionalism. I read that message over and over. Not because I was proud, but because it reminded me that sometimes doing the right thing doesn't just save you, it opens a door for someone else. A month later, I flew to New York to speak at the annual technology conference. It was the first time in years I stood on stage not as someone's employee, but as myself. Cameron introduced me. This is Clara Jensen, the woman who proved that ethics and performance are not opposites. I stepped onto the stage, warm light falling over me. The room went silent. I spoke slowly, without a script. Just told my story. I didn't mention Horizon. I didn't talk about revenge. I talked about the value of knowing when to stop before someone takes everything from you. When I finished, the applause rolled through the room like a wave. I looked down and saw faces, some familiar, some former rivals, many strangers. But in their eyes, I saw something I hadn't felt in a long time: respect. Afterward, a woman in her 50s approached me and took my hand. I just lost my job after 20 years, she said. Your story made me feel less alone. I squeezed her hand. No one should ever feel alone for doing the right thing. When she left, I turned back toward the darkened stage. A part of me still couldn't believe that one day, the story that once filled me with shame could become something that gave others hope. That night, in my hotel room, I opened the window. New York shimmered below me like a living circuit board, every light its own story. I thought of Victor, of Horizon, of all the people I'd left behind. No anger, no gloating, just the quiet certainty that everything was now where it belonged. My phone buzzed, a message from Cameron. Westbridge signed a 3-year deal. They want to meet with you in person to plan the new strategy. I smiled, set the phone down, and watched the city lights flicker across my glass of wine, scattering reflections on the ceiling. Finally, I whispered to myself, there's a chapter I get to write my own way. And I knew that chapter wasn't an ending at all. It was just beginning. 3 years later, I sat in my new office on the 27th floor of the Apex Tower, the glass wall opening to a sweeping view of Elliott Bay. On my desk was a framed photo of Maya and me from our summer trip, both of us in straw hats, laughing under the California sun. Sometimes I still found myself amazed, not by what I had achieved, but by the simple fact that I'd survived it all, through the closed-door meetings, the professional reminders, and the people who mistook silence for weakness. Now, I was the vice president of global client relations at Apex. 23 people reported to me, including Maria and Devin, the same colleagues who had once fallen under Victor's control. We often joked that if someone turned our story into a Netflix series, no one would believe it. 3 fired employees now running the executive board of their old company's biggest rival. Cameron knocked once on the glass door. He never knocked twice. Got 5 minutes, Clara? For you? Always, I smiled. He sat down, placing a folder on the table. I just got a call from Gerald Haskins. You remember him? Horizon's lawyer. I raised an eyebrow. Don't tell me they're in trouble again. No, Cameron chuckled. Quite the opposite. Horizon just finished its restructuring. Their new CEO wants to host a summit to thank the people who helped them realize the importance of transparency. I laughed outright. They want to thank the woman who almost got them shut down? He shrugged. They're calling it a strategic turning point. They asked me to forward you the invitation. I glanced at the letter printed on the thick paper, the new CEO's signature scribbled at the bottom. They wanted me to speak at their annual conference. Topic: Upholding corporate integrity in times of change. The irony was almost poetic. Cameron looked at me, half encouraging, half curious. You going? I folded the letter, smiling. Of course. Not for revenge, just to close the book properly. 3 weeks later, I returned to the building where, 3 years earlier, I had sat crying in the parking lot. The Horizon logo was different now, new paint, new plants, but the smell in the lobby was the same, polished wood mixed with expensive floor cleaner. An organizer led me into the main conference hall. Over 100 employees filled the seats. The host introduced me formally, Mrs. Clara Jensen, Vice President, Apex Global Partnerships, former Director of Operations, Horizon. I walked up to the stage. No nerves, no trembling, just a steady calm. There were familiar faces in the crowd, older now, but softer somehow. I spotted Paige in the third row. She smiled and nodded. I began slowly. I used to work here. I once believed that if I worked hard and stayed loyal, I'd be protected. I thought a company was like a family. But I learned a simple truth. Companies aren't families. They're partnerships. And partnerships only stay healthy when both sides respect each other's values. The room fell, silent. When I left, I didn't take anything with me. No files, no data. Just what was mine, my integrity, my reputation, and the belief that I deserved better. That belief is what brought me here today. I looked across the room. If anyone in this room has ever felt unheard or undervalued, remember this. Silence isn't loyalty. It's just the kind of agreement someone else wants to hear. Applause rose, not loud, but steady, sincere. I nodded and stepped down. On my way out, Paige caught up to me, grasping my hand. Thank you, Clara. You have no idea. They really changed. I squeezed her hand gently. I hope so. Sometimes people have to lose everything before they learn how to keep what matters. That afternoon, as I walked out of the building, a breeze carried the faint smell of coffee from the same cafe I used to visit every morning. I stopped, catching my reflection in the glass. No longer the woman trembling in her car over a pay cut. Now, someone who knew her worth and didn't need anyone to define it for her. My phone rang. Maya, Mom! I got picked to represent the school at the science fair. I laughed, warmth swelling in my chest. That's amazing, sweetheart. I'll be right there, front row. Promise? Of course, I said softly. I always keep my promises. I hung up and looked up at the Seattle sky. Still gray, but somehow beautiful today. Maybe because, for the first time, I wasn't seeing it through anyone else's window. That night, at home, Maya was asleep. I sat at my desk, finishing notes for tomorrow's meeting. My screen still displayed a line from the speech I'd just given. Justice doesn't always come from a courtroom. Sometimes, it comes from the moment you choose to walk away. I read it again and smiled. No more proving. No more needing recognition. No more revenge. Horizon was the past. Apex was the present. And me, I was finally myself. I turned off the light, leaving only the faint glow from the city beyond the window. Seattle hummed with noise and motion, but inside me, everything was still. Because after all the storms, all the sleepless nights, all the rain, I'd finally come home, and I knew then. This story was never about revenge. It was about an ordinary woman discovering the greatest power she had, not to defeat anyone else, but to stand up, move forward, and never look back.